Once upon a time, in a kingdom blanketed by endless winters, a queen sat by her window, embroidering with black silk against the snow. As she sewed, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell onto the white fabric. Enchanted by the contrast, she whispered a wish. "Let me have a daughter with skin as white as snow, hair as dark as midnight, and lips as red as the blood on this cloth." The wish was granted, and the queen gave birth to a daughter Snow White. But joy was fleeting. The queen did not survive the night. The king, stricken with grief, remarried within a year, choosing a woman of unearthly beauty, Queen Lavera. Cold and distant, Lavera had no love for the child, who was raised in the shadow of the throne, watched by servants and ignored by her father, who remained lost in sorrow. Snow White grew up wandering the frost-kissed halls of the castle, seeking warmth in the kindness of handmaidens and stable boys. She longed for her father's affection, but he drifted further away with each passing year. Meanwhile, Lavera's beauty never faded, nor did her vanity. Her days were spent before a mirror of polished obsidian, whispering to it in a language no one else could understand. Sometimes Snow White would catch glimpses of strange figures in its dark surface, shadowy shapes twisting unnaturally, whispering things she couldn't quite hear. When Snow White blossomed into adolescence, whispers spread through the kingdom of her unparalleled beauty. Servants began to murmur that the young princess would one day surpass the queen. Lavera's lips curled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. That night, she stood before her mirror and asked the question she had asked for years. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For the first time, the mirror hesitated. Then, in a voice like wind through a graveyard, it answered, "Snow White, your majesty." Lavera's smile vanished. Within a fortnight, the huntsman was sent into the woods with orders to return with Snow White's heart. But he could not do it. He had watched Snow White grow from a lonely child into a kind young woman. And though he had seen cruelty in many forms, he could not bring himself to be part of it. Instead, he led her deep into the forest and begged her to run. "Go, child, do not look back. The queen's wrath is endless." Snow White fled, stumbling through the gnarled roots and thorn-choked paths of the ancient woods. The air was thick with mist, the trees whispering like ghosts. When exhaustion claimed her, she collapsed beneath the hollow of a great oak, thinking it might be her final resting place. That was where the dwarves found her. 7 of them, wizened and weary, lived in a hidden cottage nestled deep within the forest. When they discovered Snow White, her face pale and streaked with tears, they debated what to do. Some feared she would bring danger upon them, for no one ran from a queen and survived. Others saw the innocence in her sleeping form and could not turn her away. When she awoke, they offered her food and shelter. "You may stay, but heed our warning. Do not open the door for strangers, no matter how kind they seem. The queen will not rest until she has your life." Snow White promised, and for many months she lived in peace. The dwarves treated her as one of their own. They taught her how to harvest roots, mend clothes, and listen to the whispers of the wind. In return, she kept their cottage warm, singing songs to fill the silence of their lonely existence. They became a family, one she had never known she needed. But Lavera's cunning was unmatched. The queen came in disguise, not once, not twice, but thrice, each time inching closer to her goal. The first time, she brought a lace so tight it stole Snow White's breath. The second, a poisoned comb that sent her into a fevered slumber. The dwarves saved her both times, undoing the queen's wicked work with desperate hands and whispered prayers. The third time, the queen offered an apple, its skin glistening like rubies in the autumn sun. Snow White, weary of suspicion and longing for the sweetness of kindness, took a bite. She collapsed, still as death. The dwarves' sorrow was immeasurable. They built a glass coffin and laid her inside, refusing to bury her. They murmured, keeping vigil by her side, "She is too beautiful for the earth to claim." Seasons passed, and still they watched over her, their grief never fading. And then, one fateful evening, a prince arrived. He was radiant, golden-haired, with eyes that shone like the dawn. He knelt beside Snow White's coffin and wept, whispering words of devotion. With a touch as soft as silk, he brushed his lips against hers, and Snow White woke. The dwarves rejoiced, and the prince carried Snow White away to his castle, a place of towering spires and endless feasts. She had never known such happiness. The world was bright and perfect, filled with music, laughter, and love. The prince adored her, promising her a wedding like no other. But there was one thing they lacked: a rare diamond from deep within the earth, the only gem worthy of their union. Snow White turned to the dwarves. "You must mine it for me. You have always been skilled in such work. It will be my wedding gift to the prince." At first, the dwarves hesitated. Something about the request unsettled them, though they could not say why. But Snow White's smile was radiant, her joy infectious, and they could not bear to disappoint her. "For our dear princess, anything," they said, and ventured deep into the mountain. Days passed, then weeks. No one returned. Snow White, lost in her dream of love, did not question their absence. But cracks began to form in the illusion. At first they were small, a shadow moving strangely in candlelight, a servant repeating the same phrase in the same tone every morning, a mirror in her chamber that refused to show her reflection. The prince would sometimes speak in a voice that sounded distant, hollow, as if it came from far away. Then came the whispers. In the halls at night, just beyond hearing, voices murmured. A sorrowful song drifted through the corridors, the language unfamiliar, yet aching with grief. One night, Snow White awoke in her vast silken bed and realized something. She could not remember the taste of the apple. She turned to the prince, wanting to ask if he remembered. But his face was wrong. His features flickered. His golden hair darkened. His eyes sharpened into something cruel, and his lips curled into a smile that sent ice through her veins. The illusion shattered. Snow White gasped, choking on stagnant air. She was still in her glass coffin. The dwarves' graves lay before her, freshly filled. In the black glass of the coffin, her reflection was not her own. It was Lavera's. "Did you enjoy your dream, my darling?" Snow White's scream shattered the night as she scrambled against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her chest, feeling the stillness of the real world settle around her like a suffocating shroud. This was not the warm castle of her wedding, not the kingdom filled with light and laughter. The illusion was gone. A rustling sound carried through the trees. Lavera turned toward the approaching figures. Royal guards dressed in mourning attire, torches flickering in the midnight air. Behind them, a grand carriage bore the royal crest, its black drapes fluttering like the wings of a raven. Lavera let out a delicate, broken sob, falling to her knees beside the coffin. "My sweet stepdaughter," she whispered, voice trembling with practiced grief. "We found her too late. She wandered into the woods, lost. The dwarves could not protect her." A nobleman stepped forward, bowing his head. "The kingdom grieves with you, your majesty." Tears glistened in Lavera's eyes as she caressed the cold glass. She was so loved, so kind. I only wished to be a mother to her. The guards lowered their heads in solemn respect. The story had been sealed, the truth buried. As the last mourner turned away, Lavera stood and walked to the castle alone. The grand halls were silent, save for the crackling of torches and the whisper of silk against stone. She moved with measured grace, stepping into her chamber where the black mirror awaited. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," she breathed, her reflection sharp in the darkness. "Who is the fairest of them all?" The glass rippled like ink spreading through water. A voice, deep and knowing, murmured, "The fairest of them all is you, my queen." Lavera closed her eyes, a slow smile curving her lips. She had won. It had always been her story to tell. Thank you for joining us in the world of Twilight Fables. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.